Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 248 or 248. My name is Jono Logan, and I am in a bit of a bind tonight because I am flying to Nova Scotia tomorrow morning, very early, and I am not packed yet. And it is 7:15. By this time tomorrow morning, so 12 hours from now, I'll be at the airport waiting to get on the plane, and my suitcase is still unpacked. So this is called time management at its best. But that's okay, because I am here to talk some video games with a fantastic panel. They are going to calm my nerves, and they are going to make me relax into this, so I'm not panicking. So let's meet our panel today. Zach Wilkerson.
Hello.
And Izzy Parsons.
Hi.
Zach, you just actually got back from a big trip overseas, didn't you?
I did, yeah. My girlfriend, who I guess I could just say is Alana, who used to work here. I was over there for about 2 months. We went to Paris. We went to Italy. I'm a teacher, so I kind of have that ability to kind of be somewhere else for 2 months, and it was amazing.
That's lovely. Has traveling settled down? Because I know in 2020 it was either impossible or a nightmare. In 2021, it was just a pain in the butt.
I mean, it's definitely settled down, but like in Europe, there are a lot of strikes going on. So like we were supposed to fly out of Rome one day, and then our flight got canceled. And because everything else was booked, we couldn't fly out for 2 more days. So we got put up in a hotel for 2 days.
Oh, wow.
Which isn't the worst thing in the world, a hotel in Rome. But like she had to work and things like that. So it's still a little bit of a challenge, but it's certainly more doable than it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, I am flying out from Pearson, which is currently apparently considered to be the worst airport in the world.
That's impressive.
Yeah, delays at Pearson are apparently like they've made worldwide news. I saw it as one of the top stories on CNN a few weeks ago. Thankfully, this flight that I'm taking has never been canceled, and it's very rarely delayed, like historically over the last couple of weeks. So I think I'm safe.
How long is the flight to Nova Scotia from where you are?
It's only like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah.
I mean, I'm flying to PEI first. Because I'm meeting my parents there, and we're going to see a show at the Charlottetown Festival, a theater festival there, and then we'll take the ferry back. Yeah, the ferry. There was a big story in the Maritimes. One of the ferries to PEI, the engine room caught on fire, and they had to ground the ferry, and like everyone's cars, because it's a car loading ferry, so there were like hundreds of cars stuck on this boat for like weeks.
I mean, it's always like a good thing though, so in some ways, because then like there's no way it's going to happen again anytime soon.
I guess, but I've taken the ferry many times, and at no point have I ever gotten on thinking, I wonder if this is going to be on fire by the end of this trip. And now I will. So anyway, it's, you know what, I'm traveling tomorrow, but I know two people who are not going to be traveling, and that's neither of you, because you have your butts planted in front of the television playing one of the two games that we're going to be discussing today. But we aren't going to talk about that yet. Instead, we are going to jump in with another highly anticipated game that got released. That is a remake, and that is Live Alive. This is a Square. I was about to say it's a Square Enix, but it's kind of like it's a Squaresoft game. Here's the problem. For years and years and years, we had no idea whether it was called Live Alive, Live Alive, or Live Alive. Now we are sure that it's called Live Alive, and it just sounds wrong to me. But this was a 1994 SNES RPG that was released in Japan and was never actually localized for the West. However, there was a fan translation, as many Squaresoft RPGs were translated by fans. I played it 2 decades ago. I remember enjoying it quite a bit. Was not the best looker on the SNES. In terms of graphics, the original looked very similar to, I would say it looked very similar to about somewhere between Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy V in terms of the graphics. Did not look bad, just didn't look stunning. It didn't look not even remotely approaching Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, which immediately followed this. But finally, the West is getting Live Alive with not just a remaster, but a full HD 2D remake. It has brand new pixel art, has brand new larger and more detailed character sprites. It has that sense of depth that we see in Octopath Traveler. There are tons of other HD 2D games coming out, including the Dragon Quest III remake, Triangle Strategy, it's technically HD 2D, but for me, the isometric POV doesn't quite seem as striking to me. But this version also includes some brand new features such as voice acting. And people have been really, really enjoying this, including you, Izzy. You wrote the review for the site. You gave it an 85, and yeah, this was you've been kind of one of our specialists for reviewing games that should have been released over 30 years ago, but just got a release. So how did you enjoy it?
Yeah, so like you were saying, it's a huge glow up. So that's a nice thing to just get to experience this classic, but with a modern coat of paint, more than a coat of paint, really, since it's completely different looking. But it's always been a game I've been curious about, and I've played a lot of different fan translated stuff, but for some reason I just never got around to Live, even though it always interested me. But then once I heard it was getting a re-release, which was around the time when I was seriously considering playing it, right?
Of course.
So as soon as I heard it was going to get a re-release, I was over the moon getting to play something like that. Something I love about video games is, unlike, I don't think film does remakes very well very often. Video games, surprisingly often, is a remake either at least interesting, but often actually good, which I appreciate a lot. And Live is definitely good. I didn't play the original, like I said, so I can't compare it directly, but I feel like it holds up well. So yeah, I guess premise of Live, if someone hasn't figured it out or learned by now from all the trailers Nintendo was putting out and Square was putting out, is kind of similar to Octopath Traveler. There's 7 stories, 7 different main characters, and you can play them in any order. But unlike Octopath, they take place in different times. So there's one that takes place in Imperial China. There's one that takes place in the distant future. There's one that takes place in prehistory. There's one that takes place in modern day. So the characters don't interact during these vignettes you play of them. And they're also of like a varying length, and they have unique mechanics for each one as well. So it's almost like it's a short story collection or a collection of short films or something, but
yeah, I liked your short film analogy in your review.
Right. It feels like that. They're all very experimental. They're almost like art house films, but like a bunch of short art house films in a collection, because they're so experimental with what they do with video games and with RPGs and stuff like that at the time. And they reference a lot of things. I think I mentioned in the review that the distant future one is kind of like 2001 meets Alien, and that is true. The near future one is very reminiscent of Earthbound, but has its own stuff going on. But there's definitely that, or Akira too as well. There's a motorcycle, there's psychic powers.
I remember when I played it, and I mean, again, it's been 2 decades since I played the fan translation. I've been keeping up with watching like footage and stuff like this. I haven't played the remake yet, although I suspect I will, because it looks really good and it looks right up my alley. I remember thinking that not every story, but most of the stories could easily have been spun off into their own full-length games and expanded into that. Like the settings, the effort that went into some of the characters. Like, I mean, my favorite, just because it was so unique to RPGs at the time and even today, was the Old West section.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fun. Like the ability to set all those traps and everything. I thought that was the coolest one by far. The Ninja World was cool too.
Yeah, it's just the aesthetic of each world is so different too. They don't look like each other, which is really nice.
Totally, and they use like different techniques, and like some of them use like different camera techniques and stuff, rather than just being always from the same angle. And there's all kinds of little different touches that make them feel really different.
Yeah, and there are like cutscenes and things like that. Like I remember the cutscene going into the ninjas section, like the ninjas flying in on a kite.
The whole intro section of the ninja part is gorgeous in the remake for sure.
I thought in general that was the most gorgeous one. Like as you're running along those rooftops.
Oh yeah,
so just cool. Like I think it's the best looking 3D or 2D HD game that of the 3, because I've played Triangle Strategy as well in Octopath, and I think it's better looking than either of them.
I agree. I think they've really ironed out the kinks with the whole process, the whole style, and
the look. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to more games coming in that style, since it sounds like Square Enix is really going for it.
Yeah,
so counting the days until we get a Chrono Trigger remake with it.
I don't know where that is.
It'll either come out or it won't, but everyone's going to be anticipating it until then. Another thing that slightly is different than most RPGs of this period, like at this point, Square was pretty solidly on the turn-based combat but they did something a little bit different here. It's not just turn-based in terms of like Final Fantasy active time battle system. It uses a grid-based system with the usual command structure. How does this work?
Right. So it's kind of like, it is almost ATB. Like characters charge up to get to do their action. So do the monsters. And you can see the bars for both yourself and the monsters. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of plan ahead very well. But you also can move around a grid, and different attacks have different like directions and spaces that they can attack. Some attacks are really hard to hit with, and you kind of have to maneuver well to get with them because they're like really weird distance, or only hit like one square in the corner that's like 5 away, or things like that. And then whenever an enemy's gauge fills up, they just get to take a turn instantly, but they have to use a turn to move as well, which you don't. So if once you fill up a gauge, you get to activate that character, and you can move around freely with them, and it just kind of slowly increases the gauge for everyone else. So it gives you a lot of freedom to set things up how you want them set up, which is kind of, it's like a blessing for winning, but it does feel a little bit like a curse in that it makes the game a lot easier than it could be, I think, because you have so much of an advantage over your opponents.
In terms of this particular system, I think they kind of took this and simplified it with Chrono Trigger, where it was also a location-based system where certain attacks, you'd have to be on certain locations in the field in order to attack the enemy. This just takes a much more, I guess, almost strategy game model to it.
Yeah, it's like there's other strategy games that have like smaller parties than something like a Fire Emblem or whatever, where you have like a similar party size to a RPG, and this feels much more like that, like Treasure Hunter G or the Uta games, Uta Ware Rumono.
I mean, I think that the thing, and I agree because I didn't play it, but I watched Alana play it, and like I feel like the way they could play with the positioning and stuff like that, like it was so easy that it never really mattered. But like the idea that you could only be in a certain place, like because I know there were sometimes you had to avoid attacks in certain positions and things like that, and it felt like it was really rich to do a lot with. But I felt like you never really had to. So I thought it was cool, but they could have done a little bit more with it.
Right. It's kind of sad that battle system stopped there, because there was a lot of potential to it, and it just kind of got one game. And it's cool we got it again. And maybe something will come of it in the future. Maybe a future game from Square will be influenced by it or something. But
well, bizarrely, I mean, I recognize that this game is decades old, but this new version, there's a lot of potential here, not even in terms of the story, but just in terms of the structure, telling these like short story, short film RPGs. Like I could almost imagine, they'll never do this in a million years, but I could almost imagine them like getting certain developers in to like create their own little stories and release it, and then kind of merge it together at the end, telling one big story that brings them all together, very much like this. But that would be really, really interesting to me, to get like very, very different flavors of RPGs in these stories.
I mean, they've done that with movies before, but it would be such a time commitment here. That would be impressive.
It's like a RPG grindhouse.
I have an idea with that. That obviously Final Fantasy 17 is going to be every team at Square making a little vignette of their idea of a Final Fantasy game.
Can at least one of them be turn-based?
Please.
One of them goes solid retro and just like uses sprites from the NES.
I'd be so down.
Yeah, I would be down with that too, to be completely honest. I think that in terms of retro-looking games, this is going to be the pinnacle of the form. The HD 2D. This is what retro-looking games are going to look like in the future, coming from Square. If we get any other releases, and there are still quite a few games from the SNES era that were never released in the West, including what was Treasure Hunter G,
Bahamut Lagoon,
Treasure of the Rudras, which is one of my favorite games of all time.
That's a tricky one because of the magic system,
right?
Although the fan translation did a pretty good job of it.
I think they can make it work. I mean, with professional localizers, they'll figure it out.
I mean, it's sitting there, it looks amazing, and it translates incredibly well to this style of remake.
Like, look, when I played that game, I kind of like look back on it and I'm like, this almost feels like the HD 2D style, but in what they could do with it back then.
Yeah. It was their last SNES game, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Which it sold terribly because of that. But
Yeah, it's such a shame when the last games released for a system. Okay, not the last games actually. The last games released for any system are like shovelware, but like the last good games released for a system.
Often some of the best, but they don't sell well.
Or in the case of the Nintendo Wii U, just the entire run of it, just brilliant games, but on a system that was never popular, and now they're just re-releasing them all on the Switch, and people are like, heck, these are good. Anyway, one of the things that's new in this version is voice acting, which is, interesting because obviously the Super Nintendo version had no voice acting. How's the voice acting in it?
It's pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with it. There's like every character has a voice. I mean, there's definitely some voice actors that do more than one character, but there's like each timeline has like some effort put into like accents and things to try and make it fit with that timeline. It just genuinely, there was never a time where I wished there wasn't voice acting, and that's not true of a lot of things. I'm not usually big on voice acting in my games, to be honest. So
yeah, especially for me in classic RPGs, because there's a lot of text, and I'm a very, very fast reader. So I like just read the text really, really fast, but it drives me crazy if like I'm done reading and voice actors are only like a quarter of the way through the sentence.
Same. I would say that's something, the short runtime and the quick pacing and like the vignette structure works well for that too as well, right? So you're not spending too long with the same voice actors, and there's not that much dialogue in each of these given stories either.
Yeah, the game isn't too long. It's about, what would you say, like maybe 15 to 20 hours, 25?
I would say, 25 is probably like the most you're going to spend on it. You could maybe spend 30 if you really wanted to do everything. I think that would probably be like do everything and don't look anything up to do everything.
I mean, that's a nice change of pace from some 150-hour games, which absolutely consume your life and you do nothing else but play it for weeks on end.
Totally.
Not saying that that's a current thing that both of you are going through, but hey.
I wish that we had more RPGs of this length, because I'm totally cool with the giant RPGs, as you've mentioned, but there is something to be said that I would like more of this kind of length. We do get enough that are still like 40-ish, 35-ish, but I wish there was more that were in like the 20 range.
I appreciate that. I'm currently on a BioWare kick. I just finished Mass Effect Andromeda, and I have thoughts, which unfortunately I will not be able to talk about because no one will ever do. I don't want to talk about Mass Effect Andromeda on this podcast. It's a few-year-old game that no one likes. Although I liked it. I didn't hate it. Most of the vast majority of the bugs that were in the original are now patched out. Also thanks to a fan patch, but that's another thing. And there are a lot of things about that game that drove me crazy, but I did spend like 95 hours playing it, so I couldn't have hated it that much.
Fair.
And also, alongside the voice acting, there is a fully remastered soundtrack. How's the music? I mean, the music is great, but how is the music in this new version?
It's so good.
Oh yeah, I agree. It is very, very good. There's a couple songs that play more than you would like, maybe. I think each area kind of has just one overworld theme, or each story, which they're not that long, so it's not like it's a big deal or anything, but it does sometimes mess with the tone a little bit when you're like hearing the same song despite what's happening. And it doesn't always like work out like that. Sometimes it plays new songs, like there's a sad song, but then sometimes it goes back to the not sad song even before you feel like it should, things like that. But I don't think that's a huge issue or anything. Something I noticed. Otherwise the music's amazing. So
yeah, it's actually really, really nice that these remasters. No, it's not a remaster either. These remakes give Western audiences a chance to hear some music that they otherwise would have missed. Like, yeah, everyone can hum along to Final Fantasy VI, but this music is a contemporary of that. It's from the same era. It's from the same company, not the same composer, obviously. This is Shimomura. Yeah. And but it's a great soundtrack. So because this is now released, we might get, I don't know, who knows, we might get some remaster, we might get some new albums out of it, certainly some fan remixes, things like that.
Right. I mean, Toby Fox is notoriously inspired by Live Alive for some of his music, and just his music in general, I would say. So, and he started as just someone making fan stuff. Look where he is now.
I think that's one of the reasons why he's so beloved, is because he came from like the fan community. Yeah.
And like very niche fan communities too.
True. I mean, obviously the fan game of Mother, it was a hit. He started doing Mother 2 fan games, right?
Yeah. His Halloween game. I can't remember what it's called. I've played it. It was fun. Definitely obviously made by someone that was still learning, but like a good like glimpse into how progress from him when he gets to Undertale and so on.
Clearly somebody who would eventually go on to make Undertale.
Right.
Well, this game is, I think it looks gorgeous. It's on the Switch. It seems like a perfect match for the console because of first off, the short run time, but also like the stories and things like that. It seems like a really good match for the console.
I agree. It's really just like that handheldness. You could play this as a handheld game, or you could play it as just like your classic RPG, but it works so well for that handheld idea, despite being originally a Super Nintendo game. Like it almost feels like it was a game made for a handheld.
Yeah. And I think it would look really good on the screen. I'm really excited to see this thing in motion. Well, this is a game that I think a lot of people were really, really looking forward to. However, there was let's say, another game coming out for Switch that I would argue that quite a few more people were pretty excited about, including many people on staff and many people on this podcast. And that is Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Tyler was on a few months ago to talk about his feature. One of our favorite features here at RPG Fan is the So You Want to Get Into the series. And this one was So You Want to Get Into the Xeno series. And it was it's a pretty darn great article that goes into the rather expansive history of the series. And like some of the games don't have anything to do with each other. Some of them are just spiritual sequels, but one of them is, of course, the Chronicles series. So Xenoblade Chronicles was one of the games that was famously included in Operation Rainfall, which was a fan campaign back in 2011.
Which Tyler actually worked for as well.
Yeah, to localize 3 major Wii RPGs. Back then, Nintendo was like, we don't think these games are going to have any appeal in the West, so we're not going to release them. And they were, it was Xenoblade Chronicles, The Last Story, and what was the third one? Why am I blanking?
Pandora's Tower.
Pandora's Tower, yes. And I mean, both of those games I understand are very, very good, but arguably the contender, the one that has stood the test of time, is Xenoblade Chronicles. Because from Chronicles, there was Chronicles X, then Chronicles 2, then Chronicles 2, Torn of the Golden Country, which is a DLC, but like a massive piece of DLC, its own game. Future Connected, which was a new piece of DLC for the Switch version of Chronicles. And now we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So Zach, you're reviewing it for us, and Izzy, you are currently playing through it diligently. We'll go to you first, Zach. What are your mid-game impressions?
Yeah, so I am like 51 hours in, and I think I just recently got past the halfway point, probably. Which, if you played Xenoblade before, that's not surprising. My initial impressions, there are a lot of reviews out there already. I've tried not to read them, but I can see Metascores, and they're not wrong.
People like this game.
Yeah, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is remarkable on so many levels. I mean, the thing that sticks out to me most about it, and I'll go into the more particulars later, is that they clearly have learned from Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 2. Like, there are so many systems in place that are similar to what they did in both of those games that were sometimes tedious or difficult, and they're not here. Like, the questing system is so much better. You can build affinity in a better way. The combat, for most people, I think they're going to like it much better than either of the previous two. I'm a real sucker for Xenoblade 2, so it's not quite there for me yet, but it's 5 times the size of Xenoblade 2. I can't believe it runs on the Switch, and I can't believe I get to play it. So yeah, it's incredible so far.
Yeah, that sort of seems to be the takeaway that a lot of people who are playing it or who have played it, they're like, I can't believe this thing even exists.
Yeah.
Izzy, what are your early game impressions? Because you just started it Monday. Today it's Tuesday evening, so you're probably
15 hours in.
15 hours in? Yeah. So what are your early game impressions like?
So I would say it was pretty early on when I just had this moment of, I think this might be the best game in the series. And I didn't expect that, considering I feel like every other game in the series kind of really takes its time to endear itself to you. There's moments in the early games of all the other ones. But I feel especially like gameplay wise, they often really take their time to get somewhere interesting. And I mean, I'm still doing like tutorial stuff at the point I'm at.
Yeah, these games are notoriously system heavy.
Yes, very, very system heavy. But despite the fact that I'm still doing tutorial stuff, like I feel like right from the get-go, there was more to grab onto than any other game in the series has done this early. Like, your initial 3 party members can break, topple, and daze an enemy, which is just a nice thing. And then your talent art for the main character can then deal extra damage to someone who's dazed. So you have like this nice little rotation for early game that like gets you used to how the systems work, instead of doing nothing for a lot of the beginning stuff like the other games.
Zach, why don't you tell us, like, without really deep spoilers or anything, but what's the game about?
It's not really a spoiler to say that you know going in that it takes place in a world that is in some way a merged version of Xenoblade 1's world and Xenoblade 2's. It's on the cover art, like it's not giving anything away. But the world that they're on is called Ionius. And there are 2 different factions on Ionius, Kevis and Agnes. And in each faction, someone is born like it's sort of like they're born like as a preteen almost. And then they're going to live for 10 years. And during those 10 years, every single person in this world is a soldier. So if you are a soldier born into Kevis, you will spend 10 years fighting against Agnes, unless you die, of course, before the end of those 10 years. If you make it to the end of those 10 years, then you go to like a ceremony where you're sent off. The entire premise is like it's just people warring with each other. And so you start off controlling 3 people from Kevis. And then I won't really give away, like towards the end of chapter 1, some things happen, and you end up teaming up with 3 people from Agnes, the opposing group, sort of in an effort to take down this or understand the world that you're living in, why people are fighting, what the point of the war is. But you know, it's the story is even more than Xenoblade 1, I think, melancholic, and it has a very sort of sad tone, which is communicated through the initial areas you're in. It's communicated with the music, which is better than it's ever been here, which is a very high bar. It's that's what the game is about.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a melancholic setup in the sense that you live 10 years and you're a soldier. So those probably are not going to be the best 10 years ever.
Not only that, but their world is dying too. They know it.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Or they don't know it, but the main character literally says it at the start of the game. So
okay.
He's like, we didn't know that our world was dying, kind of thing.
Okay. The nice thing about this game, I've heard, is that while there are connections to previous games, it's not exactly a necessity to play them. So if someone wanted to jump into Xenoblade Chronicles 3, they could. Is this true?
Yeah, you definitely could. I mean, the references right now, if you've played Xenoblade 1 and 2, like, are really, really cool. Because like it's 2 worlds like smashed together. Some of the, like, there's a zone that has like a city with like forests growing on top of it, and like one of those zones is from Xenoblade 2, one of them's from 1, and it's really cool to see how it's like how the worlds are smashed together. The characters, like the ones who are from Kevis are clearly from the world of Xenoblade 1. The ones who are from Agnes are clearly from the world of Xenoblade 2. Like their races match up. Even like the way like they work in combat. It is, you know, in Xenoblade 2, like your quote unquote arts, which are your special moves, recharge based on your auto attacks. So like their arts recharge based on their auto attacks. In Xenoblade 1's, it's just like on a timer. And so and there are some other, I get a feeling as I go further on that there will be even more. And I definitely think that like your sense of wonder is increased by having played those games. But there's no direct references at all to Xenoblade 1 or 2 yet. I mean, outside of maybe 1 or 2, if you can, you know, do some thinking back to maybe who some characters are. But other than that, there's nothing there. And I don't think you would lose a lot, but it's way cooler to play it after 1 and 2, especially to see how the series has evolved. Because 1 and 2 are both still great games. I've played them both pretty recently. I
will say that before Xenoblade 2 came out, Takahashi specifically said that it was not related to 1 whatsoever, and he lied. So
right. In this case, at least it was on the cover art.
Right. But I wouldn't be surprised if late Xenoblade 3 is so heavily influenced by 1 and 2 that you'll feel like you're missing something. I'm not going to say that that's what's going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, I'm not planning on playing it until I play Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2, and probably X as well. Because, I mean, I have them on my my wow, that is actually hard to say. Switch wish list.
You should.
Switch wish list.
And it's funny because like even though Cross Xenoblade X or whatever you want to call it, it is not in the same timeline. Like I feel like the zones and the areas in this game and like the way that like how large they are and how massive they are, it feels very Xenoblade X to me.
There's also some like story stuff or like things in the world where I was like, yeah, that was inspired by by Cross by X, even though it might not be directly connected.
Yeah, for sure. And like even like some of the designs in this game are so straight out of Xenogears. It's insane. So yeah, it almost feels like a culmination of Takahashi's work at this point to me.
Oh, definitely. And the world building is wild. Like how much it like goes through the story and the gameplay. Things like the fact that all these people only live for 10 years and only know about war. So like how often they're like, they are super confused when they meet someone who is aged, or how they don't understand farming. Like the concept of farming is like so foreign to them. It's like, this is how we could get food. Like things like that. It's so cool to me that they didn't just make it this basic premise. They actually are following through in how the world works and how it's built with these ideas.
And another thing you can do, and it's related to what Izzy's talking about, is like you can like have discussions at like campsites or like rest areas, and like those things go really far into it, and like into like that world building and the things they know and the things they don't know, and just like the impressiveness of the scope of the world and also like the depth of the world they live in, I think is really impressive.
Those campsite discussions are cool too, because they can sometimes give you side quests, but sometimes they just give you a little bit of experience, or sometimes they give you nothing. It's kind of just like you gathered some information. Let's chat about it. Let's see if it means something to us.
It's interesting that you mentioned the scale of the world, because something I would argue that this series is known for is being released on underpowered hardware. Especially for the generations that they get released in. Chronicles was a Wii game. Chronicles X or Cross was a Wii U game. Chronicles 2 was for Switch. And despite the fact that these are considered to be underpowered systems in terms of their graphical capabilities, especially when compared to, well, the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X, they look amazing. And this game really seems to have carried that on and seems to be pushing the Switch right up to the limits of what it's capable of.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some stories of people on Twitter saying that it's causing their like OG Switch to overheat, which does not surprise me at all.
Yeah, I'm worrying about that. My fan is going like crazy when I'm playing it.
Yeah, I mean, I've mostly played docked, so I think it's mostly okay. I don't know. I haven't walked up to it to see if it is okay. But it's even more because it performed so much better than Xenoblade 2. Like Xenoblade 2, it looked, I mean, like the world design, like any other Xenoblade game is going to look amazing, right? Like it's going to look great because it's designed well, but like it, especially like if you played it undocked, if you played it handheld, Xenoblade 2 looked like crap. Like it ran like 300p maybe. It looked like it was like a dust rain happening all the time on it.
It felt like I was playing on a TV without my glasses on. Like it was that far away, but without
that is not good.
Yeah, it played terribly undocked. But here, like it plays well undocked. It certainly plays better docked. But it looks great. And just given the scope of the world, like the scope of the zones, like there are fewer zones in this game because they're so interconnected. Like so far, I've only really been in 3 zones, I think. I think I just entered a 4th, but they're so massive, and the fact that it can just load between them, and there's not a lot of cut in or anything like that. It's a remarkable achievement for the hardware.
Yeah, I've heard it also actually manages to maintain a fairly steady frame rate.
Yeah, I haven't had any drops in either docked or undocked.
That's amazing, especially for the Switch.
Yeah.
Not only that, like the cutscenes, the animations in the cutscenes are greatly improved. They're some of the best I've seen in a JRPG, of like just like the kinetic motion and like the choreography of people fighting and cutscenes and things like that. Very, very impressive.
And it's even more impressive because like the battle system, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, is very busy. And so like the fact that there's no real slowdown, and there's occasionally slowdown that is built into the system. Like there are occasional like events that'll happen during combat, like if you gain or lose aggro, or things will slow down, or like you get a break or a topple. And I'm not sure if those things are purposeful for the way it runs, but other than that, like I haven't had any sort of slowdown with the system at all, which, given how dicey things can be if you're fighting a unique monster that's 10 levels above you, that is impressive. And there's a lot of things on the screen at once.
Well, let's talk about the combat for a second, because like I said, Xenoblade games are very system heavy, especially in their combat, to the point where I remember I said something quite controversial on when there was the direct a few weeks ago, and on an episode of Random, I said it kind of lost me. Just because it was their systems looked so complex. But apparently that's not the case when you're actually playing it. So how does the combat actually work in this? It's not turn-based at all.
It's got a little ATB to it, maybe. It's not action, really. It's more MMO than anything. The combat is sort of, in many ways, this whole game is like a mix of Xenoblade 1 and 2. And like, let's take the things that really worked from both of these games and let's put them together and see how it functions. And the combat is very similar to that. So basically, you have auto attacks, which is sort of your baseline attack, in combat. But then you also have like an arts palette, which are like more powerful attacks, can give like buffs, debuffs, things like that, or heal or draw aggro or whatever. And you have the same like 3 roles that you would have in an MMO. You have DPS, you have a tank, and you have a healer. And eventually, like you can like change classes to like other people's classes in your party. And you can get some of their arts as well. And then you can like interlink those arts to make them work. And you eventually can become like a machine life form as well, and like do attacks through that. There are chain attacks as well, which allow you to do like massive damage. And like even in the mid game, chain attacks are super broken in this game. It's very similar to an MMO, but it's a little bit less complex than Xenoblade 2, to be honest with you. Xenoblade 2, I think, for a lot of people, especially given how slowly they rolled it out, people struggled with it. But I think that the thing that makes this work really well for people is, first of all, as Izzy said, early on, they give you a fair number of tools, but it's a manageable number of tools to work with. And then they consistently add just a tiny bit on and a tiny bit on and a tiny bit on, until at the point I am, probably just like in this chapter, I got all the tools that are at my disposal, and it doesn't feel overwhelming to me. But also, like, as a person who like did like hardcore challenge mode grinding in Xenoblade 2, like it feels like it's not bad. So I think it might be overwhelming for some people, but it rolls it out so slowly that if you're a veteran of the series, no problems. If you're new, you might struggle a little bit, but one of the nice things is they give you tutorials where you can literally go in and test out the different things that they've given you. So like they'll say like, hey, you need to break an enemy or whatever. And then like you have to go into like this tutorial mode, and you have to go in and you have to actually break an enemy, which is way better than the tutorials that are mandatory in the game, which are miserable and far too frequent. And I hate them. I guarantee at some point they will patch it out. Some of the tutorials are ludicrous, where you have to go through and do like the exact same thing 6 times
for every party member,
for every single party member.
And they like do this thing where they'll do the same tutorial twice. Like a window will pop up, it'll tell you about it, then it'll make you do it while telling you about it.
Yeah, but those go away after about 15 hours. Those really, really, really annoyed me, but I haven't seen one for so long that I've kind of lost the trauma of those, which is good.
It'd be great if they suddenly just launched one at you in like the last 5 minutes of the game. You're in the last boss. It hits you with a final tutorial. The tutorial's the real last boss of the game.
I mean, Xenoblade 2 basically did similar to that, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's suddenly still extra systems.
That's true. Chapter 8, I think, was the last time I saw a tutorial in that game, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a 10 chapter game, so yeah.
One of the coolest things that I've seen in footage from this game is you can join your characters together for combat. How does that work?
So that was like the robot form that I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. So early on in the story, I won't really say how, like you'll eventually get linked up. So like one Kevis member and one Agnes member will be linked up. And then like over combat by like performing what's called fusion arts, which is like linking like the base class art with like one that you've carried over from another class. You can slowly build up, at least I think that's how it builds up. You can slowly build up your what's called interlink level. And then you can launch your what's called Ouroboros form, or your robot form. And you can like deal out massive damage. You can't take any damage. And like all three members can do that. And the AI can do that as well. And one thing I forgot to mention that is really cool about Xenoblade 3 is that you can freely switch between members in combat, and it's a 6-person party. And that is a huge thing after Xenoblade 2, where I wanted to do that all the time because they would never do what I wanted when I wanted them to do it. And it's very helpful here.
Yeah, I think that's one of my biggest improvements on the combat is being able to switch characters. I feel like Xenoblade 1 and 2 had a really big problem with disaster recovery where you just couldn't, because you only can play as one person. So unless you're playing as a character who can recover from the disaster, which is often not the case because you often need more than one character to recover, if battle started going badly, you usually lost. But I've found more often than not in Xenoblade 3, I can turn things back around by like switching to a healer, switching to the tank, then turning on their interlink forms purposely and things like that to really solve my problems. And I really like that. I appreciate that a lot.
So I don't know if this would be a spoiler or not. So in terms of joining your characters together, can every character join with every other character? Like,
no.
Okay,
No.
so it's
You just have one other character. So not giving anything away, but like Noah and Mio are the two like sort of main characters. And they join together. And then Senna and Lance.
okay. So you're not dealing with like tons of new designs and things like that.
That's
there's
correct.
also like you can have a 7th party member called a hero, and they don't play into this interlink system at all.
And the hero system is really cool too. Those of you who've played Xenoblade 2, you can see it's like a nod to the blade system in Xenoblade 2, which I know a lot of people have a lot of problems with, mostly because of the gotcha elements of it. I managed to get all of them. But you basically like, you have like these quests that are designed around recruiting these different characters. And they'll come into your party and they'll have, their own class. And then like you eventually can like pull their class onto yours. And like in total in the game, I think there are 20 different classes. So that means there are 14 different heroes. I could have that number wrong.
There's 17 different heroes, I think.
Okay. But the point is that it gives you a lot of flexibility in combat. Every character can play different jobs, or different classes rather. They can all have different party makeups, party setups, and a lot of them are viable. Like in Xenoblade 2, like I was like, why would I use anyone except Mithra? Because she's just going to crit and heal constantly, and I can just like spam arts. Whereas here, every character has like some art or some skill. Every hero, every class that like you really want. And so like I'm flopping around my characters to all different classes constantly. And it's just fun to play around with different art setups. And the game isn't so challenging, at least on normal mode, which is the way I'm playing it, that I don't have the flexibility to do that and maybe make some mistakes.
Yeah, that class system is going to be very addicting for me. I'm going to be putting a lot of time into it because certain characters are more predisposed to certain classes, so they learn that class easier, and then once they have it, they master it easier, and they just have stats that more make sense for it usually. But so there's like, if you really want a specific character to have some weird class that they do not gel with, it's gonna take some time. So I feel like there's gonna be a lot of times where I'm like, I want to make my party weird, and it's gonna take a bunch of time.
Yeah, Uni's a healer, but she's definitely dual wielding guns for me because she's that cool.
and then there's like you can equip some arts on the D-pad from other classes than the one you have equipped. So your face buttons have arts from the class you have equipped, but then other arts can be equipped on the D-pad, and they have to be arts that are from the opposite
colony
world faction,
colony,
whatever. Yeah. So if your face button arts are the kind that recharge on cooldown, and then the D-pad arts have to be the ones that recharge with auto attacks, or vice versa.
Interesting. I have a question for you both. Without any spoilers, like I don't want necessarily story spoilers, but who is your favorite character in the game thus far, both in terms of like their personality, but also how they play in the game?
That's easy. Uni for me. And the thing is, in terms of how they play, like every character basically like they might level up a class faster, but in terms of like their ability to use a class, it's exactly the same. Like the base stats are almost exactly the same.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter who you play, really. But in terms of the cast in general, like a lot of the hero characters are great. But Uni has got an attitude that I absolutely adore. She is like full Eastender, Londoner, having come from England for 2 months. She talks exactly like an Englander. I'm using English voice dub. I can't imagine not using that with Xenoblade.
Yeah, the English voice dubs in all the Xenoblade games are UK based, right?
Yes, they are. And they all have like different accents from different regions. Like there's a hero character that's clearly from Yorkshire. The cat girl class person is clearly from what Wales. I know, only reason I know these things is because Alana has told me. But the point is that Uni is a fabulous character. She's got attitude. She's funny. But she also, as time develops, as you would know, has, sort of reasons to behave the way that she does. But she's not like the cast like is all based on certain tropes, but they're not tropey, really, the way that certainly something like Xenoblade 2 was sometimes. So she's fabulous. I love all the hero characters too. Alexandria in particular, which I can't say anything about her, is great. But yeah, the characters in this game are by far the best in the Xenoblade series, and that is impressive.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the cast. I think even early on, it's very quick for the cast to like something I felt kind of watching the trailers and things before Xenoblade 3 was I wasn't sure if I was going to like the cast, which feels wild now because I love them, but like they didn't come across in the trailers how they actually are in the game. And I think there's just so much dialogue and banter and like just so much backstory. There's so much there, and there's so much connected to the world building and the combat and everything to just make this cast really shine in a way that I don't think I think Xenoblade 2 comes close in some ways, but still isn't there, and Xenoblade 1 definitely doesn't because some characters just did not get enough development in that game. But I think this is just very, very well done, very impressive. It feels so in Cross, there's all these characters that you can recruit, and it kind of also reminds me of Heroes because you recruit them, they can go do stuff with you, but they're not always directly connected with the story as it's going on. And I feel like that cast was super strong, and you just are very unlikely to actually properly experience them if you play Cross without getting really into it and doing all their quests, character quests and things like that.
And luckily no one threatens to eat any Napans here, so that's good.
Yeah. So I just feel like they've managed to build that kind of development into the main story and the main progress in a way that works incredibly well. And then they build on it even more in side stuff rather than feeling like you need the side stuff to get it.
Right. And I agree with that. But I think the side quests here, some of them, especially the hero quests, I cannot imagine playing this game and not doing the hero quests.
Oh, no, the hero quests feel like main content.
Yeah, they are. And like, even like, because like, if you've played Xenoblade 1, the side content in that game is notorious. Like, there are some like 550 side quests in that game, like something ludicrous like that.
And I love doing them, but I know a lot of people don't, and I understand why completely.
I mean, the first time I played the game, I did them all. Like every single one of them, just because I like doing them, but they were usually like kill 3 monsters here, and it was like really quick. But you needed to do it to build affinity, to get more quests, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to get better equipment. That game was like side quests, the game. Whereas here, there are a lot fewer side quests, but every single one feels like it is meaningful towards building, because like the different colonies that you visit are really where the side quests are based around. And it helps build affinity for that colony, which gives you different perks, but also it builds the world, it builds the characters. Like everything feels meaningful here. And even as a person who's playing this for review, who like knows he wants to get it out quickly, I'm like, oh, I gotta go do that side quest, or like, there's like that whole part of the map over there. I've got to go check that part out. So it gives you meaningful rewards for doing everything, but also develops the characters. This is one of the most character-centric games I've ever played in terms of RPGs, and that's saying something for a Xenoblade game. And I would never have said that before, but they build the characters so well, especially get into chapters 3 and 4 later. Like it's phenomenal, all the different ways they do it.
Something to look forward to, Izzy.
Totally. I forgot to say my favorite character, so
please, yes, go ahead. Absolutely.
I think I think Senna is probably my favorite so far. She's just really fun and like really always looking out for the other party members. I really like that about her. Also, just she starts with a giant hammer as a weapon. I'm a big fan of small people with giant weapons. But so yeah, so far her, but that could easily change. Or I mean, it's hard to even choose still because they're all great, like Zach was saying. And I think one thing I'd like to mention about characters that will probably be a big bonus for, or a big plus for a lot of people that maybe didn't like Xenoblade 2's characters and interactions as much, is like a lot of the complaints about Xenoblade 2 are related to how it sexualizes characters or how cheesy some of the dialogues between characters can be and that kind of stuff. And I would say Xenoblade 3 incredibly strongly reeled back on that. Like, there is a bathing scene very early in the game. The characters are totally nonchalant about being in a bath with like men and women in the same bath. No one's like being weird about it. They're all just relaxing and getting clean, and it's totally normal in their society.
I mean, you can see some of the body designs are definitely Xenoblade 2, but like they're covered as well. Like someone like Ethel, for example, like she clearly has the dimensions of a Xenoblade 2 character, but she doesn't look like a Xenoblade 2 character at all.
Right. I would definitely say it's still the same series, and there is still, because Xenoblade 1 had that as well. And I mean, the entire series is all of Xeno has always had some of that in its design, but especially like how the characters interact feels so much more mature and interesting. And I'm really into it.
Well, the takeaway I've been getting from both of you is that this seems like an outstanding sequel for a number of reasons. It sounds like they've taken all of the things that really worked about the previous titles and evolved them and moved them forward and refined, not just in terms of systems either, but also in terms of characters and the way characters are developed and the heroes and things like this. Like, it really does sound like it's a ridiculously polished experience. And that's kind of exciting because there aren't a lot of games nowadays that are released with that level of polish. Not even in terms of like gameplay and stuff like that, but also in terms of just being able to play the game, period, with frame rate issues or things like that. It sounds like they did a really good job.
Oh, they did. I mean, like my game has crashed once or twice. But other than that, like
just put your Switch in the fridge; it'll be fine.
Right?
that'll save it.
It's definitely the most refined Xenoblade experience. You can tell they're developers who listen. When people complained about this or that or the other thing, like I even think about like those giant affinity charts in Xenoblade 1 that were a nightmare to fill out. Like you would have to go like find this person in this colony at this time of day. But here, like they give you a little like star over their name, and like it's just easy. It's just easier to interact with the systems. They haven't been dumbed down really. They have been streamlined in a way that is just easier to access. To get to those things that Xenoblade wants to be about, like community building and the people and the combat and the exploration, which is just unbelievable in this game.
Yeah, you mentioned the world. It's interesting. It's not an open world, is it? It's connected zones, right?
Yes. So it like the first two zones in particular are massive. Like each one is maybe 5 times the size of a zone in Xenoblade 2. But you still occasionally have to go through loading screens to get to another zone, but they are very few and far between. Like in Xenoblade 1, there are probably like 17, 18 zones. I don't know in Xenoblade 2, I can't remember. But here I'm only at 3 and I'm a little over I'm in the 4th main zone and I'm a little over halfway. But like each zone is so massive that it could be its own world.
And something I like is that the world feels very connected in a way that Xenoblade 1 did, and Xenoblade 2 kind of felt like almost arbitrary. Like it was hard sometimes to even picture where you were in relation to things, especially in different zones, not so much in the same zone, but different zones. And I think Xenoblade 3 has improved on that a lot and feels like a callback to Xenoblade 1 in that way, where you can look and see things really far away and like feel where you are in the world in relation to other places you've been.
Well, that's interesting. What is it called? There's a concept at Walt Disney World that Walt Disney championed. I think it was called the weenie system, where a weenie is something that you see in the background that helps you keep your sense of where you are in the park. So like Cinderella's castle would be a weenie, or like the spaceship in Tomorrowland would be the weenie. I remember Caitlin passionately hates this phrase. But it seems like that's what you're kind of talking about, where you can kind of see where you are in relation to everywhere else based on what's around you and in the back
for sure.
or far away.
Like in Xenoblade 1, like sort of like the iconic thing is like you can see the Mechonis out in Gower Plain, whereas here you can see different zones everywhere, even more so than in Xenoblade 1. So it even gives you more of that sense of connectedness, I think.
All right. Well, what I see in the distance for us is the end of the show coming up. But before we do that, I wanted to do a discussion question. First, let's just say Xenoblade Chronicles 3 sounds like it's going to get a good review from you, Zach.
Yeah, I don't know the number yet, but it'll be in the 90s unless something stumbles dramatically.
And it's been getting pretty high numbers across the board. And more importantly than the numbers, what I've read about it thus far has been very, very positive. And talking to both of you, of course. So I think that we might have a contender for Game of the Year, perhaps.
I think it's the only thing I could knock Elden Ring off at this point. So we'll see.
Depending on where you're coming from, but for our particular demographic.
Indeed.
All right. Well, for today's discussion question, something actually, Izzy, that you said earlier in this episode inspired this thought. It's something that is somewhat unique, which is not all of them, of course, but many of them. Video game remakes seem to work in a way that a lot of films don't. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that why do you think so many video games get remade, and why do you think these remakes, quote unquote, work in comparison to like a film, for example? Or, well, I guess theater is theater is entirely a remake based industry. Because every single show is a remake of a play. But why do you think that video game remakes work so well a lot of the time? Obviously not all of them, but a lot of the time. So, Zach, what do you think?
That is a difficult question.
Obviously, there are some bad remakes, like let's just say the Secret of Mana, the 3D remake that was a few years ago, that kind of thing, which was just a disaster.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that film is film to some degree. You know what I mean? Like it's, film certainly has progressed in the last 100 years, but at the end of the day, it's very similar. You're watching people in a place, walk around a place, in a theater. And it feels more particular in the way that you experience it. Like I think film is a more emotive medium than video games are. Video games are doing so many different things. Whereas film, I think ultimately, I think Roger Ebert said that it was like an empathy machine, I think he coined the term. And I think that like, you think about something like Psycho, the Psycho remake, which I have unfortunately seen.
I've seen it too, yeah.
Is a shot by shot remake of the original Hitchcock.
The only clever thing in that entire movie is in the background where Hitchcock had a cameo of himself. Yeah. The director of this put in a Hitchcock lookalike and himself arguing with the Hitchcock lookalike.
Yeah. And that was cool.
It was cool, but I think the only thing that could have made that better is that the Hitchcock lookalike just punched him right in the face.
Yeah, I mean, Gus Van Sant's a great director too, so it's what makes it even more disappointing that movie sucks so bad. But it's soulless almost. That version of it is, and I feel like movies are about soul, right? And video games, I think you've seen video games evolve in a way that certainly movies don't evolve, and so you can place different graphics on top of it that make sense. You can place systems in place, and like UI improvements or different improvements to just make your life easier. And I think that is what makes it more functional. They're more willing to be faithful to the original story in a lot of cases, but also more willing to progress and evolve in ways that I don't think movies do. Movies always feel so intertangled with the original. And that are my thoughts that I just came up with at the top of my head, which are probably nonsense. So there we go.
That's the reason why I asked. That's what I wanted. Izzy, what do you think, Izzy?
So I think a lot of it is to do with the interactivity of the medium. So there's that part of a game that is like all media takes something from some kind of participation from the audience. But I think obviously video games have the most. And I think that participation also kind of ties video games to people in a way. It makes like you have moments and memories of not just plot beats or like visual effects or things. You also have moments that you specifically personally did as a person. You have moments of all kinds of weird like systems and stuff. So there's not only is there that like getting to play a remake is like getting to try and re-experience those moments you created in by playing it, but I guess there's also just the fact that with video games you can just improve the visuals. Like some games just looked bad, you can make them look better. It's not all games, and obviously art is art, but there are games that you can just make look better, and that's already a big change. Some games have like how gameplay is made has changed so much that like design decisions that they were just like, we can't think of any other way to do this back when it was made.
Yeah.
Could have made the game arduous to play, and then now it's like, oh wait, this would be easily solved by doing this technique now, or things like that. And I think that's part of it being interactive, because there's no like you are a remake can make an experience more, not just more enjoyable, but more smooth in a video game in a way I don't know if a film can do.
No, I understand what you're saying. It's easy to forget, I guess because we're in the middle of it, that video games are still a rapidly evolving industry in terms of how they're developed, in terms of the systems, just in terms of, well, we're talking about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 in comparison to Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and just the way those systems evolved and got smoother. And at some point, if they decide to remake Xenoblade Chronicles in like 10 years, I suspect that the systems that are so smooth in 3 would be imported into the remake.
I mean, there's a lot of definitive edition in 3 as well. You can see them sort of iterating.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different kinds of remakes for video games as well. There is let's call it the Psycho remake, which is the 1-for-1 remake, which sometimes can be super successful, like in the case of Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and other times be, as you said, completely and utterly soulless, like the Secret of Mana remake. And then, of course, there's the expanded remake that expands the story and the world and the graphics, like the Final Fantasy VII remake. And then there are remakes that do that as well, but also get rid of gameplay conventions that we've moved beyond. Like, for example, Resident Evil 2 remake, thank God tank controls are gone. Now you just have a good old-fashioned over-the-shoulder, because it works better to service the story and the gameplay. And yeah, there are a lot of people who miss the tank controls, but I think a lot of that's just nostalgia rather than actual objective, this is better thinking. But that's just where I'm coming from. So I don't know. You're right, because video games are such an interactive industry, and the overall experience and the smoothness, the what's the word I'm looking for? User friendliness of being able to play them is so important, that being able to refine that and make it better for the player can create a better experience. And I think that might be why they work. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think quality of life is a big factor in a lot of them.
Yeah,
and 7 is doing something very different. And I think that all the criticisms I have of 7 remake, Nomura and company, like, they understood how to nod back, how to move forward, how to do it in a different way that makes people happy. And I think at the end of the day, like, a lot of times in video game industry, like, they're just interested in telling a good story as opposed to like doing something clever with a remake. And I think 7 remake is a little guilty of that in its ending, maybe, but they also just like add great characters in, and like they just add good stuff in. And maybe film feels like it can't do that. I don't know. It's a great question.
I mean, there's also like the cash grab idea. Like, let's take a classic and remake it for today, but let's not put any real thought into it. Let's just make it soulless and polished, and any message that there is surface. Like, the first thing that comes to mind for me is RoboCop versus the original. I guess that the video game equivalent of the remake of RoboCop would be like Warcraft 3 Reforged, which it's clearly like a mandate. We have this. We want to release it to earn some more money. It doesn't matter if it's good or not.
And I guess the equivalent to something like, say, Chrono Cross Remastered, where it just doesn't run as well as the original, is like when they make weird re-releases of movies, so it's the same movie but it has like a weird filter over it, like suddenly the movie's bluer or things like that.
Yeah, like, well, I mean, if we want to go for the ultimate example of that, that's Star Wars. That's the original trilogy being released in 1997. Okay, yeah, we've managed to get this down. So remasters are the special editions of video games. Remakes are like I guess anything that puts remake after it, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Like, in 20 years from now, it's going to be like the Final Fantasy VII remake what happens when you remake the remake?
And I also think that like cultural touchstone has something to do with it. Like if it's enough of a deal to be remade as a movie, it's going to be a way bigger deal than any video game is, right? And so I think about like some of the changes they made in like that version of Star Wars, which are minimal. Who cares who shot first? Oh my gosh.
Well, thank you. There's the hate mail going to be rolling into my...
Yeah, I hope it does. I hope it does. Please forward it to me. I will respond. Like, who cares? But like, people get so hung up on that stuff, and I think that is part of it as well. Is just like the collective conscious, I'll say. I'm playing too many Takahashi games.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
But yeah, I think that's part of it too. I don't know.
Yep. It's all about how many childhoods can be ruined, I guess.
I guess it's also partially just what people are used to as well. Video games have been remade since basically video games existed. So it's just kind of like it's part of video game culture. And like theater is transformative. It's like a huge part of what theater is being transformative. And so you just can't even like compare it almost in that respect, because the history is just so different.
It's true. And the thing about theater for me is that theater is, theater is not cheap. It is not inexpensive, but compared to like a multi-million-dollar movie, it really is. And I'm not talking about necessarily like a big Broadway production, but like a lot of
Shakespeare in the Park.
Yeah, a lot of remakes, so to speak. You just need a cast of talented people who have a passion for the text and an idea about how it can be reinterpreted. And you can just do that in a park. And if it might catch on, it might not. But like the barrier for entry is very, very low in comparison to films and video games.
That's true. And if you did the same sort of thing with movies where you use the exact same script, but you like iterate it on a little bit differently, I think people would like, no one would give them the money to do it. Right. So like it's
been done once.
It's been done once. So who cares? Right. And outside of like Shakespeare movies, I'm not sure how many times I've seen Hamlet in movie form. You're not going to see that because it's too expensive.
Yeah. You can't like even a cheap movie is going to run into the millions and millions of dollars, right, unless it's like super, super indie, but in which case it's not, unless it is very lucky, it's not probably going to break through.
Right. I don't need to see a remake of Clerks, so I'm good.
No, you could just watch Clerks 2 or 3. That's coming out. I mean, that is the plot of Clerks 3, apparently. They're going to be making Clerks 1.
That's amazing.
Which is pretty meta, and I actually think it's pretty interesting.
I like Kevin Smith more than some people, so yeah.
I had all of the DVDs on my shelf when I was in high school, and I think that certain films in that series...
Even Mallrats?
I had Mallrats for the audio commentary more than anything. The audio commentaries were the best thing about those films. The audio commentaries were Kevin Smith podcasts before Kevin Smith was podcasting.
That's fair.
Anyway, well, I want to thank you both for taking some time off of playing Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to talk to me about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I assume that both of you will get right back to your fun after we leave off. Yeah.
Well, I have to review Soul Hackers 2, so there's that as well.
Oh, of course. Yeah, the review train never ends here at RPG Fan. There's always something else coming out. Yeah, just out of curiosity, Izzy, how is it so far?
It is a game in which my opinion on it keeps changing. And not always negative or positive, or, just I do not know where I'm going to land on it in the end whatsoever.
You know what? I think that's a good reason why a lot of people talk about should you finish video games? Do you need to beat a video game to form an opinion on it? And I think if you're a casual gamer, you don't need to. I do firmly believe that if you are a reviewer, you need to maybe not absorb every bit of side content, but you need to see everything that the game offers in order to form an opinion that you should be able to share with people. And in this case, Soul Hackers 2, this is the reason why.
Yeah, totally. I agree.
Anyway, well, thank you. Like I said, thank you both for coming. For everyone who's listening, I want to tell you that we have some very big news about RPG Fan. We have a store now. Yes, we have opened RPG Fan store. We sell a number of things. We sell t-shirts, we sell mugs, we sell stickers, we sell magnets. We have a bunch of other products that are on the horizon. As soon as the store opened, I ordered 2 mugs, 2 t-shirts, all of the magnets. So my fridge is going to be covered with RPG Fan, which is something I've always dreamed of. And I get to wear it on my shirt now. So I get to wear it. It's like my sports team. It's my equivalent of my sports team.
I'll be repping RPG Fan as well. Don't worry.
Oh yeah, I know. We all will. So if you are interested in taking a look at our wares, you can find everything at www.rpgfan.com/shop. And please take a look. And if you have ideas or suggestions for products, you can send them off to me, I guess, and you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can find me there at Jono_Logan. Zach, where can we find you online?
The best way is probably email, zachw@rpgfan.com. You can also find me on RPG Fans Discord at ZachW.
Cool. And Izzy, where can we find you online?
So I'm afraid of social media. So
smart person.
You can find me by messaging Jono, and then he can forward things to me, or he can just answer them, and I don't even have to deal with it at all.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, it's pushing all the work over to me. If you don't feel like messaging me, you can always message one of our other hosts at one of the other podcasts here at RPG Fan. For example, Mike Solosi at Retro Encounter. This month, Solosi and the panel are taking a deep look at the PS3 classic Tales of Xillia. And that's been going really, really well. I think Solosi took a week off, so the second part is going to be posted later this week.
It's a pretty good episode.
Yeah, so I look forward to listening to that. Rhythm Encounter is our other podcast that is released every alternate Monday with us. Last week was The Road SNES Traveled, which was all about music from SNES RPGs that are not Final Fantasy or Chrono Trigger, because believe it or not, they do exist. And it was a really, really cool episode. And I actually got to listen to some music that I never thought I'd actually hear on Rhythm Encounter, including some games that have never been talked about before from RPG Fan. Some interesting titles there. And then next week on Rhythm Encounter, it's going to be tropical island themes from RPG. And personally, I have my fingers crossed for some Star Tropics because I love myself some Star Tropics. If you enjoyed this podcast, however, you can share it with your friends. You can help us get the word out there, and please rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Finally, again, Izzy, Zach, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was glad to be here.
Thank you, everyone listening. I am going to head off now and pack my suitcase. And whatever you're playing, have fun.